Thank you, Stefano. And now let's open it up for questions, comments. Sister Helen.
Thank you very much, Stefano. Very stimulating, as always. I think I would, the thing with these problems, like the one you were talking about when does it start, this thinking about the human being, when does economics start becoming disconnected from ethics, you could always go back earlier and say it started earlier. I think, though, even more significant than the places that you mentioned is the distinction between Occam and St. Thomas on what is the relative importance of will and reason. Because for St. Thomas, they are equally important, whereas for Occam, will is the highest power of the human. And once you lose reason, will can go in any direction, and it becomes also much more subjective. We start to see this Kantian position, and then we start to see all barriers being thrown off economics. So we sort of, it's what Servais Pinckaers calls the beginning of the atomic age, he calls it, with Occam. So I think we can even go a bit further back. The other thing I would say about growth, it's an interesting word in the sense that it's fundamentally a biological word. And it makes me think about Agamben's argument that all the really important economic terminology, a bit like Carl Schmitt says about political science, is fundamentally secularized theological terminology. So what's happened is when we use the word growth in these contexts, we've completely lost the original meaning of the word, so much so that we have to say, no, we should talk about development. We can't talk about growth. You know, and I think this is one of the things that we see in this area, that the words get completely emptied of their meaning. And one of our big issues now is how do we maintain the meaning of the words? How do we protect our words? I just saw that Luciano Floridi is coming to give a talk at the British School in Rome on our semantic capital. And I said to him, I wrote to him an email saying, is this connected with the thing that I think is really important, which is cultural pollution? Which is what the big businesses are doing now, where they take an idea, they turn it into an instrument for promoting their existing way of doing the business, like sustainability. We had CSR before, we had shared value, we had corporate citizenship, we had the stakeholder, we had all these words that have been gradually emptied of their meaning in order to do something which they weren't supposed to do. And also we have them endlessly using important, valuable words to sell images of ways of life to young people who are completely unprotected from their advertising because they have no alternative like a religious view or anything else. They're completely grabbable by these big companies. So we're seeing active cultural pollution. I think big businesses now are very well aware of the fact that environmental pollution, and they're trying to do something about it. But there's nobody talking about cultural pollution and how we're changing the meaning of words, and we're not able to go forward if our words don't say something. You know, my third point is I think tacit knowledge is absolutely right that you're talking about. When I was working on human-centered technology as a PhD student, the one thing we always kept working on was how could we create technical systems which allowed tacit knowledge to come to the fore, to value tacit knowledge. That yes, we have to codify things. Yes, we need coding. We need to be able, but if we don't put the tacit knowledge in a really central place in the workplace, we are never going to be able to give real value to human skill. So I think we can connect a lot of different pieces of work around this tacit knowledge idea. Last 2 points. The question about government, I know that you would agree with me on this. It's just that in your talk, you gave a rather negative view about how governments make mistakes about what they invest their funding in for research. But I think now, let's look at the kind of people who are running governments. You know, we've got Trump, we've got Johnson, we've got Orban, we've got... What we need to do now is to really promote the political vocation. We've had years of people saying, if you really want to change society, go into business. And yeah, that's very important. The businesses are really important. But if we don't get good people in the political positions doing the kind of good things that, for instance, Marina Mazzucato talks about, you know, she often talks about how the big businesses are just eating off what we've had big public investment in major things like the internet, and then, you know, Zuckerberg comes along and they make huge private profits out of basically investment that's been done by the public sector. You know, so let's be a bit more positive about public sector. Of course, we need to talk about civil society as well. Last thing, 2 years ago, we did a seminar on spirituality and technology in which we tried to get transhumanism and the spirituality people in the Pontifical universities to talk to each other. The only person we could get to say anything was Philip Larry, who was sitting here. You just cannot get the people who are experts on spirituality to take this transhumanism thing seriously. They just think it's a load of rubbish. They don't want anything to do with it. And I think that you're absolutely right, that it's a major religious movement, that if people who have expertise in spirituality in the church or another religious tradition don't take seriously, it's just going to run amok. You know, we have to connect to it. We have to. So absolutely, I hope maybe we can do something about this. Thank you.
Okay. Rocco.
One word on transhumanism. I wonder whether there is something deeply religious. The idea of the net substitutes the idea of the community, and rather the idea of the communion. You want to dissolve your identity in the net, and you think that it is better for yourself. I wonder whether there is a consequence of the dissolution of the presence of the church as a real community in society, and whether more in general, when we think in terms of state and market, is it wrong, or is it a consequence of the fact that civil society to a large extent has been annihilated, has been destroyed, as a consequence of the fact that the most important factor that keeps civil society together in our societies is the living presence of the Catholic Church in Catholic countries. In other situations may be somewhat different. But I say this because an antecedent of transhumanism can be found in the philosophy of Ludwig Feuerbach. Feuerbach had the idea of a Gattungswesen, a communitarian essence of man, in name of which you can disregard the individual human being. So that's the first point. The second point is there is a kind of vertigo of power. These people have discovered something that increases enormously human power, and they control it. They have a monopoly of knowledge. They've organized a system in which knowledge is the most important productive forces, and they have a semi-monopoly of the decisive knowledge. And then they imagine they can substitute the church, transhumanism, but also the state, because we have an aggregation of power now that can easily influence the results of our elections and the decisions that our parliaments take. And I wonder whether we should do two things. One, I remember the situation in the United States at the end of the 19th century. And there came the antitrust laws. Without the antitrust laws, today, the world would be materially the property of the Morgans, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, and they were compelled to give up their hold on power. They maintained their wealth, but they could no more exercise their power. Whether we need something like that. On the other hand, how can we help to generate the subject that is adequate in the situation of today to govern the processes that are taking place? We cannot leave this power in the hands of Zuckerberg and Gates and so forth. I am doubtful that we should give this power to the state. How can a power arise that must be the result of a convergence of several communities, independent but having a common background? The common background, that is the idea that we are, well, there are nations and there is Europe, but there is in the end a common humanity in which we all converge, the idea of a global governance. Last point, I was deeply impressed by what you said on the common good. The common good is not the sum of goods. The common good arises out of the fact that I care for you, and your good is part of my good. And I cannot define my good without including your good in this. It is the idea of communion. and unity. And St. Augustine in the Civitate Dei says that the Romans have grown. There was growth in the Roman world. But what was enfeebled was the conscience of the unity. And then, when they had reached the utmost power, all of a sudden, they collapsed. I wondered whether this could be also our destiny.
Pier Paolo.
Thank you, Stefano, for your very, very rich paper. I want to go back to your sentence when you state it is necessary that the subjects involved recognize their being in common, being in common. Now, this is precisely Pope Francis Laudato Si and all the magisterium by the Pope, which is a magisterium trying to bring into the church back what I would call a culture of relationality, a culture of social relations, how to deal with social relations. And this is, to me, very meaningful, very significant, because economics, modern economics, is precisely a culture against relations, or against, or a relational way of thinking. An Italian philosopher, Roberto Esposito, wrote a book about immunitas, saying that modern economy is a way to immunize people from social relations, and so you get individualism and so on. Now, the problem is that, I mean, what you are suggesting is to put ethics into economy. But how to put ethics into economy if economy is about means, about the means? Certainly, it's about the allocation of resources, the allocation of means in respect to goals, but it is, anyway, about the means and not about the goals, because about the goals, about the values, about the norms, that's another discipline, which is ethics. So there is a division of labor in what we call human and social sciences, which prevents the possibility of introducing ethics into what we call economics as a discipline, the economic system, the economic market, whatever has to do with the economy. Now, this is the situation. Why so? I think that very curiously, you mentioned the ideaphoric criteria in the economic markets. Now, ideaphoron was an invention by the Catholic Church. Ideaphoron was precisely an invention of the canonists, the canon law experts in the Middle Age, precisely at the same time of St. Thomas Aquinas, I mean. And I think that canon law invented this particular figure of ideaphoron. And we have to counteract that move by the canonists. When you, Stephen, talked about technical externalities and peculiar externalities, clearly peculiar externalities are relational externalities. They have to do with relations, social relations. And one of your most important works at the beginning of your academic work was on the difference between technical and social relations. A very important paper you wrote. So the question becomes how to recover a culture of social relationality, because this is the issue today. If we don't if we are not able to elaborate the culture of social relations, we cannot immunize, you cannot counteract what we call the immunization of people from social relations. We can relate means to goals, the economy to ethics, and so on and so forth, because we don't have a culture of how to relate things together. That is, their being in common. Being in common means to have a precise idea of how to deal with relations. Relations are an emergent effect between the terms, and they exist. Exist means to be existing outside the terms, existing, staying outside as an autonomous reality. So relations have their own reality, and we do not know exactly how to treat them. And I think this is what we need in order to deal with the issues you have talked about. So I wanted to know your opinion about that. Thank you.
Maria.
Thank you, Stefano, for an excellent paper and an even better presentation. I want to ask you a question, but first let me go to Walras, because what you said is perfect. I remember reading a book written by Lester Thurow saying that, I read Walras in translations, saying that translations have missed one precondition for clearance, for balance in equilibrium in the action market of labor, which was you had to meet the condition of social reproduction of labor. So prices will clear demand and supply for labor, but at a price that will never go below the cost of reproduction of labor. I don't know whether that is true because I didn't read the original manuscripts, but in a book by Lester Thurow, who was dean at MIT at the moment I was there, he wrote this. I remember reading this. My question is, some economists who are studying the digital economy say that one reason for the increasing monopoly power of the big tech firms, the superstar firms, is network externalities. Thank you, by the way, for the concept reminding us pecuniary externalities. So I wanted to know, what do you think about network externalities and lock-in effects that, for instance, made it very difficult for Europe to develop digital giants, no? China, the strategy is to protect the market and don't allow Facebook to get in, or Google, or Amazon, and you have the Alibabas and the others. Europe didn't develop digital giants. In Latin America, among 6 unicorns, there are 4 that have been built in Argentina. So what do you think about this concept of network externalities also?
Thank you. I start from this last question, Beatrice. Yes, you are right. Walras, politically speaking, he was a socialist, you know. Most people forgot that. And in fact, what you said is correct. It was a wrong translation from French into English. And nobody took the courage to correct in 150 years that mistake. Because Walras said, the working of perfect competition presupposes that everybody, every worker, reach the minimum level of subsistence. Then, beyond that level, the market, labor market mechanism decides if you have to get more or less than me, etc., etc. But that condition was cancelled because he was, in fact, a socialist, politically speaking. And most people believe that he was a right-wing, which is not true. That is the fact that there is you cannot imagine how much ignorance there is among economists. Ignorance of facts, because these are facts, are not ideas, etc. The other point is correct. Network externality, yes. But I'm sure that you know the concept of cooperative platforms. In America, there are already 5 big cooperative platforms, what is being called platform capitalism. In other words, why platforms? should be left in the hand of Uber, etc., and not creating cooperative firm. You know what is a cooperative firm? From a theoretical point of view, we can prove rigorously, mathematically, that the solution provided by a cooperative firm is superior to the others, from the point of view of the total general welfare. So there are. The point, and I am rather optimistic that something like that will start developing. Americans have already started in that direction. Now, Helen, Occam versus Aquinas, you are right, but now there is no time. We will have lunch together, but your point is well taken. Development and growth. In fact, the point is that it is not correct to talk about sustainable growth. That is why we have to talk about sustainable development, for the reason I mentioned. With an animal, you do never say that animal developed from one year to the other. You say that dog grew from one year to the other in 10 kilograms, etc. So that is why. But if we maintain that, we have to consider that development is the conjoint of the three dimensions. And even in the debates nowadays, in my opinion, there is an exaggeration only on the growth dimension. Because of course we have to protect nature. In my opinion, my reading of Laudato Si is exactly that. The Pope says the ecological question cannot be separated from the social question. In other words, we have to deal with the two jointly, not first one and then the other, which is exactly the idea of development. The question of tacit knowledge, we are in full agreement. It is interesting that, as Marcelo Orozco knows very well, that the notion of connect today is coming back. It was lost for almost 60 years, connection in an educational project. Connection means that you have to operate and to organize, for instance, the labor place in such a way as to facilitate the extrapolation of tacit knowledge. And the intelligent entrepreneurs nowadays understand that. And in fact, they are modifying the internal organization of labor. Because even the youngest fellow entering a firm could have a brilliant idea, etc., etc. On the other hand, if you apply the Tayloristic model, I say, shut up because you are a freshman, and so you understand. Finally, what you said about the government is perfect, okay. I am in favor of the public sector, but the public sector is not only government sector. That is the equivocation. Public sector is the joint of government sector and civil society organization. The point is to find the mode, because if the government sector says to the others, you have to obey to what I have decided, that is not the public sector. That is what is called statism, which is, as you know, very dangerous, etc. That is why we needed to brush the principle of subsidiarity, etc. And on transhumanism, recently I participated to it, not in this place, in another place. People said to me, we don't understand why the Pope or the Church is so worried about the lack of new vocation. I said, what do you mean? Oh, because in few decades, there will be no need of priest. I said, what do you mean? Oh, because when we will arrive at the artificial consciousness, not only artificial intelligence, but and we will do, then human being will never make any sin. And so there is no need to confession, etc. That is what I meant before when I said these people are playing God. And so that is why Donati is right. The transhumanism has a religious, intrinsic religious, let's say, component, which is exacerbated also by other aspects, unless we consider that. Rocco, you are right, I agree with you. Why you say civil society has been destroyed? Yes, because the relational paradigm for which Donati has spent the whole life is not taken into consideration. We use relations, but if you go to the foundations of our doing social science, relations are considered like a good. But the relation, the very moment you treat relational goods as if they were market goods, you destroy the notion of relationality. So that, now, vertigo power, as you know, being a philosopher, that there are two notions of powers. Power as potence, what Nietzsche did, and power as influence. Now, I believe, when you raise the question, who is the subject, that we need to be a bit more optimistic on the second notion of power, power as influence. After all, Jesus, he had no power as potence, but as influence, when he said, my kingdom is not of this world, etc. But it seems to me that he was rather influential, and he succeeded in changing something, etc. Finally, what you said about the common good, I totally agree. Common good means that I have to take care, which means it's not enough that I do not damage you, but I have to take care. And in fact, respondus in Latin means the way of things. I have to put the way of things on my shoulders. That is the best way in practical terms to understand the notion. Finally, Pier Paolo Donati, yes, he said about the Adia Forum, I totally agree, etc. And it's true, pecuniary externalities are a matter of relations, so I totally. But he says, how do we change it? Now, as you know, today, until 30 years ago, there were three basic paradigms in economics: political economy paradigm, the civil economy paradigm, and the Marxian paradigm. After the collapse of the Berlin Wall, the Marxian paradigm has disappeared. So now we have two paradigms, political economy and civil economy. Now, civil economy was born before political economy. And as you know, I keep on reminding, the first chair of economics in the world was established in Naples, not in England, not in Scotland, because Adam Smith, he had the chair of moral philosophy. And the Neapolitan called that chair of civil economy. And the first chairperson was Antonio Genovesi, who was a priest. And because he was a priest, he was, of course, attacked by everybody, as you can understand easily, etc. No, yes, but that is truth. There is evidence of letters, etc., etc. Now, the point is, the civil economy paradigm does not accept NOMA, the non-overlapping. Second, the civil economy aims at common good, and finally, the civil economy has as its targets public happiness. If you take the book by Genovesi, the Esergo mention exact public. In other words, we operate for public. The point is that, for understandable reasons, the civil economy paradigm was put aside completely at the beginning of the 19th century, for understandable reasons. Because, you see, England became the first power, and so political economy was entrusted in England, and that explains it. That is the notion of, in Gramsci's sense, of cultural hegemony, etc. But now we are coming back. There are many signs in different countries. Let's just mention Dragonetti. Dragonetti was a pupil of Genovesi, and his book was translated in those days, published in 1766, in 4 different languages. Now, go and check the American Declaration of Independence, 1776, quotes Dragonetti, Giacinto Dragonetti, because Thomas Paine could read the book in the English translation, and he said, we Americans, we have to follow the instruction given by Dragonetti. Because Americans are cunning, they are pragmatic. When they observe that something is, on the other hand, in Italy, the opposite was true. But it is interesting that today there is. So the point taken by Donati is correct. unless we change the paradigm, not the model, but the paradigm. Paradigm is a Greek word which means a vision of the world. It is right that we will not overcome the strictures of those who think that economics is, after all, the science of the optimal allocation of scarce resources. Time is up. Thank you very much.